It was the night of August 24th, 2001. An Airbus A330 belonging to Air Transat lifted off from Toronto, Canada, heading east toward Lisbon, Portugal. On board were 293 passengers and 13 crew members. 306 souls in total, unaware that they were about to face one of the most extraordinary emergencies in aviation history. Their flight number was Air Transat Flight 236. At the controls sat Captain Robert Piché, a seasoned Canadian pilot with more than 16,000 flight hours, and First Officer Dirk de Jager, a young but capable co-pilot. Together they guided the twin-engine Airbus across the cold, dark Atlantic. The flight was smooth, the stars clear, and everything seemed routine. But high above the ocean, at 39,000 feet, something invisible was brewing beneath them. A slow fuel leak that would soon drain the aircraft's lifeblood. Around 4.5 hours into the flight, First Officer Dirk noticed something odd. The fuel readings didn't match. The right engine showed much lower fuel than the left. At first, it seemed like a simple sensor problem, a common issue in modern jets. Captain Piché decided to transfer fuel from the left tank to the right to balance them. What they didn't know was that a small fuel line on the right engine had cracked, caused by a maintenance error just days earlier. The moment they began transferring fuel, it rushed from the left tank to the right and leaked straight out of the damaged pipe into the Atlantic night. Within minutes, thousands of pounds of jet fuel were gone. The Airbus continued to cruise eastward, completely unaware that both its tanks were being emptied into the ocean. The flight management system still showed they could reach Lisbon, and passengers were relaxed, some sleeping, some watching movies. But in the cockpit, the fuel imbalance warnings kept coming. Captain Piché and Dirk contacted Air Transat's maintenance control over the radio, asking if the readings could be false. The answer wasn't clear. They were told to monitor the situation. Then, at 5:36 a.m. UTC, a new warning pierced the calm. Low fuel, right tank. Captain Piché made the call. They would divert to Lajes field in the Azores, a Portuguese island air base roughly halfway between Canada and Portugal. The crew turned the massive A330 southeast toward Lajes. They declared an emergency and began descending slightly to conserve fuel. Inside the cabin, passengers began to notice the change in engine tone. The flight attendants calmly explained they were diverting for a technical issue, nothing to worry about. But then came the first real blow. At 6:13 a.m., the right engine flamed out. The fuel leak had finally drained it dry. The Airbus was now flying on a single engine, thousands of miles from any coast. Captain Piché remained calm. He briefed his co-pilot. "We'll continue toward Lajes, keep her level. Watch the temps." Dirk handled communications with air traffic control in Santa Maria. Controllers assured them that Lajes was expecting them. The runway lights were on. But 12 minutes later, at 6:26, came the sound no pilot ever wants to hear. Both engines failed. The cockpit went quiet, eerily quiet. Only the rush of wind outside filled the air. Every electrical system powered by the engines went dark. The A330 had become a glider, flying silently 34,500 feet above the Atlantic Ocean. Piché's instincts took over. "We've lost both engines. Set best glide," he said. Dirk quickly calculated that at that altitude, with the aircraft's glide ratio of about 17:1, they could travel roughly 65 to 70 nautical miles, if they kept the speed perfect. Lajes Field was 65 miles away. It was going to be close. The emergency ram air turbine deployed automatically, supplying minimal hydraulic power so they could still control the aircraft. Captain Piché now had one task: keep the A330 gliding as far as possible. The night sky was pitch black. Below them was nothing but endless water. Dirk called out altitudes, speeds, headings. Piché trimmed the plane, keeping it at the best glide speed. Passengers had no idea both engines were gone. They felt the silence, but cabin lights still worked from emergency power. Some began praying. Parents held their children close. Then, through the clouds ahead, faint lights appeared. The island of Terceira, home to Lajes Air Base, but they were still too high and too far north. Piché decided on a daring maneuver, a 360-degree glide turn to lose altitude while aligning for runway 33. The Airbus descended rapidly, completely powerless. The flight attendants prepared the cabin for an emergency landing. "Brace, brace," echoed through the cabin. Passengers tightened their seat belts, eyes closed, holding hands. As the coastline loomed, Piché guided the jet down through the final clouds. The approach was steep, much steeper than normal. Without engines, there was no go-around, no second chance. Every correction had to be perfect. The Airbus crossed the shoreline at just 300 feet altitude. Airspeed was high, around 200 knots, too fast, but they needed it to maintain control. At 6:45 a.m., after 19 minutes of total engine silence, Air Transat Flight 236 touched down at Lajes. The tires blew out instantly from the speed. Sparks trailed behind as the jet raced down the runway, but it stayed upright. The pilots used the remaining hydraulic pressure to steer it straight. Finally, the A330 shuddered to a stop. All 306 people aboard survived. Only minor injuries were reported during evacuation. The world would soon call it the Atlantic glider. Investigators later discovered the root cause. A maintenance technician had accidentally installed the wrong hydraulic fuel line on the right engine, a tiny part that didn't fit correctly, causing friction and rupture. The resulting fuel leak went unnoticed until it was too late. Despite that error, the crew's skill turned a potential disaster into a story of survival. The flight data showed that from the moment both engines failed to touchdown, Captain Piché glided the 230-ton aircraft 75 miles, setting a world record for the longest glide ever by a commercial airliner. For their actions, both Piché and Jager received international awards for heroism. The Canadian government and aviation authorities praised their calm and precision under impossible pressure. In interviews later, Captain Piché said quietly, "We were lucky. But luck favors the ones who are prepared." The passengers later described how they hugged each other on the runway, realizing how close they had come to dying. Some called their families from the military base that night, their voices shaking with relief. Among the survivors were children, honeymooners, and families returning to Europe from vacation, all bonded forever by those 19 silent minutes. Today, pilots around the world study Air Transat 236 as a case of perfect airmanship. How quick thinking, teamwork, and training saved hundreds of lives. The Airbus A330 was later repaired and returned to service, flying for many more years. Captain Piché retired with honor, remembered not just as a pilot, but as a man who refused to give up when everything went dark. And so, on that August night in 2001, over the endless Atlantic, when every light flickered out and both engines died, one crew turned a disaster into legend, proving that even when the sky turns silent, courage can still carry you home.